In an unforgettable moment on live television, Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, faces off against late-night host Jimmy Kimmel in a heated debate. Tensions rise as both sides exchange sharp words, but what happens next will leave you stunned. Make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest fiery confrontations. Now let's dive into this unbelievable showdown. The lights of the live studio audience dimmed as the familiar jingle of Jimmy Kimmel Live played, signaling the start of another episode. However, tonight, something felt different. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as the special guest taking the stage wasn't just a celebrity or a typical politician. No, this was Pam Bondi, a figure who had long been a lightning rod for controversy in American politics. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and no-holds-barred style, had invited Bondi on the show to discuss a range of issues. What was meant to be a civil conversation quickly escalated as Bondi's first words were already sparking tension. "You know, Jimmy," Pam began with a cool, almost rehearsed smile, "the left is so quick to point fingers without ever looking at the true state of our country." She leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. "You can't just ignore the damage that's been done by the previous administration. But you and your friends don't seem to want to acknowledge that." The audience was instantly on edge, sensing the weight of what was to come. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, his face a mix of disbelief and amusement. The calm before the storm. He wasn't one to back down, especially when dealing with guests like Bondi. He knew he had to push back, and push back he did. "Pam, let me stop." "You right there," Jimmy replied, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "I'm not talking about the previous administration. I'm talking about the now, the here and now. You can't keep blaming the past for everything that's going wrong today." The tension in the studio thickened as Bondi's smile faltered for just a moment. She had been ready for a political sparring match, but Kimmel wasn't going to let her hide behind deflections. She had come to push a narrative, and Jimmy wasn't about to let her get away with it. "Jimmy, it's not about deflecting," she shot back, leaning in. "It's about acknowledging the damage that's been done. Your side doesn't seem to want to have a real conversation about the consequences of these policies. You guys just want to talk about division and drama." The crowd could feel the emotional escalation, the calm before the real chaos. Kimmel, with his characteristic smirk, wasn't backing down either. "Oh, I get it," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's all division and drama when you don't want to face the truth. But maybe the truth is something that's a little too uncomfortable for you right now." The audience gasped, their eyes darting between Kimmel and Bondi, who was now visibly irritated but determined not to show weakness. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, and gave Kimmel a look that could cut through steel. "You don't understand what's at stake here," she snapped. Kimmel, however, wasn't finished. He leaned forward, staring directly at Bondi. "What's at stake, Pam? The truth? Because that's what we're talking about here. You and your political allies are so wrapped up in your own agendas that you've lost sight of the people you're supposed to be serving." Bondi's face flushed with a mix of anger and frustration. She had come to the show thinking she could control the narrative, but now she was caught in a corner. She could feel the weight of the audience's stares, every pair of eyes in the room, fixed on the back and forth between her and Kimmel. This wasn't just a typical late-night interview. This was something personal. Was this the moment she'd lose control? Could she deflect the heat, or would the relentless probing of Kimmel finally break her? And more importantly, how would she respond when the truth was laid bare before millions of viewers? The camera zoomed in on the intensity of the exchange. The audience could almost feel the rising temperature in the room, the clash between Jimmy Kimmel's sarcasm and Pam Bondi's defensive posture. It was clear that neither party was willing to back down. Bondi, a seasoned political strategist, had faced tough questions before, but this moment felt different. Kimmel wasn't just asking questions, He was challenging her in a way that felt personal. "I've been listening to you for a while now, Pam," Kimmel said, his voice firm yet still holding that trademark sharpness. "And I'm starting to wonder, are you ever going to talk about the real issues? Or are you just going to keep blaming everything on other people? Because, let's be honest, that's what it sounds like to me." Bondi's jaw tightened as Kimmel's words hit their mark. She had prided herself on navigating heated discussions with ease, but something about Kimmel's directness seemed to strike a nerve. She took a deep breath, her fingers tapping on the armrest, trying to compose herself before responding. "You're being unfair, Jimmy," she said, her tone a little cooler, more controlled. "You don't understand the complexities of what we're dealing with. It's not as simple as pointing fingers at people and expecting change. There are policies and decisions that need to be addressed, but no one wants to have that conversation. Because they're too busy with their own agenda." Kimmel leaned in slightly as if savoring the moment. "Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your agenda is pretty clear. It's about keeping people distracted from what's really going on. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop playing politics and start actually focusing on the people you claim to represent." The sharpness in his voice caught Bondi off guard. She had been used to political conversations in controlled environments where people took turns speaking and agreed on the basic framework of the debate. But Kimmel wasn't operating on that level. His questions weren't about the surface, they were about the heart of the matter. For a brief moment, there was a shift in Bondi's expression. The politician, who had long prided herself on her ability to control the narrative, was now visibly rattled. But she wasn't about to give in. "Jimmy," she said, her voice steady but with an edge, "I've been in politics long enough to know what's real. But the problem is, you, and people like you, want to paint everything as a simple black and white issue. The reality is far more complicated." Kimmel didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I know, Pam. It's complicated, all right. But here's the thing. When things are complicated, that's when people need leadership. Real leadership, not political doublespeak." Bondi's eyes narrowed as Kimmel's jab landed. She tried to keep her composure, but something in Kimmel's words seemed to hit too close to home. She had built her career on the belief that politics was about finding middle ground and making tough decisions. But now, sitting across from Kimmel, she wasn't sure if she was being taken seriously anymore. The man wasn't asking her to explain policies. He was questioning the very principles she stood on. "Leadership isn't as easy as you make it sound," Bondi said, her voice sharp. "It takes strategy. It takes compromise. You don't just waltz in and demand change without understanding the complexity of it all. Is that what you think is happening here?" Kimmel shot back. "You're still talking about compromise like it's a noble thing. But it's not, Pam. It's just a way of avoiding making tough calls. Sometimes real change means stepping up and doing what's right, even when it's hard. And you've been avoiding that for too long." The exchange was getting heated, and it was clear that neither of them was willing to give an inch. Kimmel's words were getting more direct, more personal, and Bondi's defenses were beginning to crack under the pressure. The studio felt tense, the energy palpable. Would she stand her ground, or was she about to crumble under the weight of his scrutiny? The audience was on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next move. How far could Pam Bondi push back? And how much longer would Kimmel allow her to dodge the uncomfortable truth? The air in the studio was thick with anticipation. The audience was no longer just watching a conversation. They were witnessing a battle of wills. Jimmy Kimmel, with his irreverent charm and biting commentary, had turned the tables. Pam Bondi, typically known for her poised demeanor, was no longer in control of the narrative. She could feel the walls closing in around her, but her political instincts kicked in. If she wanted to regain control, she'd have to fight back with something more than rhetoric. "Let's get one thing straight, Jimmy," Bondi began, her voice now carrying an unmistakable edge. "You're right about one thing. Change doesn't come easy. But you're wrong to assume that I'm avoiding difficult decisions. Every day we make tough calls. I'm in the trenches, dealing with the consequences of policies, not just spouting off on a late-night show. Kimmel wasn't about to let her reframe the conversation. Trenches? What trenches? Pam, you're talking about all these tough decisions, but when have you ever faced any real consequences? The people you represent, those everyday Americans, are the ones bearing the brunt of the decisions you and your allies make. And yet, here you are, playing the victim, and pretending to be the voice of reason. The audience could sense the shift. Bondi's tone, once authoritative, was now defensive. The room was charged with the palpable energy of a confrontation that had long been brewing. Bondi's lips pressed into a tight line, her hands now resting rigidly on the armrests of her chair. "Don't patronize me, Jimmy," she snapped. "I've fought for people's rights. I've been on the front lines of legal battles that have changed lives. So don't sit there and lecture me about the people I represent when you don't even understand what it takes to fight for them." But Kimmel's face, usually so full of humor, had taken on a serious expression. "No, Pam, you don't get it. You've spent your entire career making deals, bending to the will of the powerful, and now you're trying to act like you're some kind of champion for the people. The reality is, you've been too busy playing the game to actually listen to those you claim to represent." Bondi, visibly rattled but determined not to lose her ground, pushed back. "Jimmy, you have no idea what it takes to actually navigate the system. You think it's all about what happens on this stage, but it's much more complicated than that. I'm in a position where I have to make choices that you can't even begin to comprehend." Kimmel raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I understand. Perfectly. You're telling me it's hard to do the right thing? That you're caught in a web of political games and backroom deals? That sounds like an excuse, Pam. And the truth is, people are sick of hearing excuses. They want results, not political jargon." The words stung. Bondi could feel the weight of Kimmel's criticism, but there was something more, something that unsettled her. The crowd was no longer just an observer in this debate. They were a force, and their collective energy was shifting. They weren't buying what she was selling. Not anymore. "Results?" Bondi repeated, her voice tight with frustration. "Well, how about this? I've been fighting to protect the integrity of the system. You can sit there and criticize me all you want, but at least I'm in the game, making things happen, not just pointing fingers from a desk in front of a camera." Kimmel, not missing a beat, responded with a smirk. "Right, Pam. You're in the game all right, but you've been so busy playing it that you forgot who's supposed to be winning." The room went silent, and for a brief moment, Bondi's facade faltered. It was as if Kimmel's words had cut straight through the layers of political armor she had carefully built over the years. The irony was impossible to ignore. Bondi, a master of spin, had been caught in her own game. Kimmel had dissected her, talking points with surgical precision, and now she was left with nowhere to turn but the cold truth. Could she recover from this? Could she twist the conversation back in her favor, or was she about to be fully exposed as just another politician who had lost touch with the very people she was supposed to represent? The audience was riveted, waiting to see if Bondi could summon the strength to push back, or if this was the moment she would break under the pressure. The tension in the studio was palpable. Pam Bondi's face, usually so composed and confident, now betrayed a sense of unease. She had been outplayed, outmaneuvered at every turn, and the audience, once perhaps indifferent, was now fully engaged, watching the battle unfold. Her reputation as a tough, no-nonsense politician was beginning to crack under the weight of Kimmel's relentless questioning. The room had become a pressure cooker, and it seemed only a matter of time before something would give. Bondi's eyes flicked to the audience, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the response was immediate. Silent, skeptical stares. She knew she had lost them. She could feel the shift, the moment when the audience had stopped viewing her as a powerful figure and started seeing her as just another politician with a shaky defense. "You know, Jimmy," Bondi finally said, her voice quieter now, but with an underlying edge. "You think you've got me all figured out, but you don't. The game I'm playing is bigger than any of this. You sit here and mock the system, but what do you know about it? You don't have to make the hard calls. You don't have to get your hands dirty in the way I do." Kimmel leaned forward, his expression no longer amused but sharp and calculated. "Hard calls? Is that what you're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been making deals that leave the American people holding the bag. You talk about getting your hands dirty, but I've yet to hear you take responsibility for anything that's actually hurt them." For a moment, the studio was dead silent. Kimmel's words hung in the air like a weight that couldn't be lifted. Bondi's lips pressed into a thin line as she realized that every word she had spoken, every defense she had tried to present, was crumbling. The public's perception of her had already shifted. She wasn't the fierce defender she once believed herself to be. She was someone who had been caught in the crossfire of her own hubris. Her voice shook slightly, but she pressed on. "You don't understand, Jimmy. You've never been in a position to make these decisions. You don't know what it's like to have the weight of the nation's expectations on your shoulders every single day." Kimmel's eyes never left hers. He had won this round, but he wasn't about to let up. "I understand perfectly, Pam. You're making excuses. You've built a career out of avoiding accountability, and now you want sympathy? The truth is, you've made your choices, and people are starting to see them for what they really are." Bondi's expression tightened. She was floundering now, desperately trying to stay afloat in a sea of her own missteps. The audience, once divided, was now firmly aligned with Kimmel. Her once imposing presence had been reduced to a fragile image of a politician struggling to stay relevant in a world that was moving on without her. "Enough, Jimmy," she snapped, standing up abruptly. "You've had your fun, but let me make one thing clear. You can't always win by tearing others down. Sometimes the truth is more complex than you're willing to acknowledge. Maybe you should take a good hard look at the reality of this country and the choices that need to be made for the future." But Kimmel wasn't buying it. "Complex? Is that what you call it? The truth is simple, Pam. People are suffering, and they don't need politicians hiding behind excuses. They need leaders who will take responsibility for their actions." The word stung more than she cared to admit. Bondi had been accused of many things in her career, but never before had she been so completely and publicly dismantled. Kimmel wasn't just exposing her flaws, he was revealing the cracks in the entire system she represented. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room that her attempts to fight back were futile. Bondi's chest rose and fell with each breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had come into this debate expecting to control the narrative, to outsmart her opponent with her polished rhetoric and experience. Instead, she found herself on the receiving end of a public scolding, one that had stripped away any pretense of political poise. Kimmel had won. The audience knew it, Bondi knew it, and even the cameras seemed to linger a little longer on her, capturing the look of defeat on her face. But then, something unexpected happened. As she turned to walk off the stage, Bondi paused, a flash of realization crossing her face. For the first time in the entire exchange, she let her guard down, if only for a second. She hadn't won, but maybe, just maybe, the conversation had opened a door to something bigger, a truth that she hadn't been ready to face. Kimmel watched her, his eyes narrowing in contemplation. He'd exposed the cracks in her armor, but now he was left to wonder if this encounter would change her, or if it would be just another chapter in the long history of politicians refusing to learn from their mistakes. The silence that followed Bondi's abrupt exit was deafening. The audience, still in shock from the intensity of the exchange, was left to process the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Kimmel sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable, as the studio lights flickered slightly, signaling the break in the tension. But even as the cameras cut away to commercials, the undercurrent of what had happened remained. The confrontation between Pam Bondi and Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just a heated debate, it was a moment of reckoning, a turning point that would resonate beyond the studio walls. The world outside would be buzzing with speculation about who had truly won. Would Bondi regroup, defend herself, or retreat further into the shadows? Or would this moment mark the beginning of a new chapter for the embattled politician? As the show moved on, Kimmel's mind was still on the exchange. He had never seen a politician so visibly shaken in the heat of a live debate. Bondi's defensive posture had cracked, revealing the exhaustion beneath her carefully crafted persona. Kimmel was no stranger to tough interviews, but this was different. There was something about Bondi's loss of composure that felt like a victory for the truth. He had, in a way, exposed her vulnerability, and in doing so, he had shifted the conversation in a way that few could have predicted. The media soon erupted with headlines, each one dissecting every moment of the interview, pulling out quotes and sound bites. Pam Bondi, shut down by Jimmy Kimmel, dominated social media feeds. The internet was flooded with memes, GIFs, and opinion pieces, all centered around the same question. How had Kimmel managed to do what so many others had failed to do? Had he, in a way, done something more than just shut down a politician? Had he perhaps exposed the cracks in the very system she represented? But the real question loomed larger than any soundbite. Would Bondi fight back or fade into the background? She had been publicly embarrassed, and the public's thirst for drama wasn't about to let her forget it. The political world watched closely, waiting to see if she would find the strength to turn the tables, to reassert herself and reshape the narrative. The truth was, the damage had been done. Whether Bondi chose to fight or retreat, her image had already been altered, perhaps irrevocably. Behind the scenes, Kimmel's team had already started analyzing the fallout. There were whispers of higher-ups within the show calling this exchange a game changer. But Kimmel himself remained quiet, reflecting on the interview in solitude. He wasn't basking in victory. No, it was more complex than that. He had done his job as a comedian, but also as a host with a platform to challenge, provoke, and yes, even embarrass when necessary. But was this the line? Was this too far? The world wasn't waiting for answers. It was waiting for Bondi's next move. Would she retreat to the comfort of her political world, clutching onto whatever power she still had left? Or would she rise again, learning from this public thrashing and coming back with a new plan, a new voice? Kimmel had left her speechless. Yes, but the question was whether the experience would humble her or embolden her. Days after the interview, Bondi issued a statement, predictably defiant, still claiming that Kimmel had simply played to the crowd. She insisted that she had only been speaking the truth, and that her words were lost in the noise of a comedic attack. But beneath the bravado, the cracks were still there. The reality was, she hadn't been able to match Kimmel's sharp wit, nor had she been able to mount a defense that left her with the upper hand. Her statement failed to win back the favor of those watching. In the aftermath, a curious thing happened. The political landscape started to shift. The people who had once admired her unwavering stance now questioned it. Kimmel's words, piercing and bold, had laid bare what many had suspected for years. There was more to the story, more to the political game than just spin, but Bondi wasn't done yet. The clash with Kimmel, humiliating as it had been, had sparked a fire inside her. She wasn't ready to back down. The battle wasn't over. She would find another platform, another way to regain control. The fight might have been Kimmel's, for now, but she wasn't willing to concede. As for Kimmel, he had made his mark. He had thrown down the gauntlet. He had faced off with one of the most powerful political figures in the country, and emerged victorious. But in his quiet moments, he wondered if he had done enough. Had he exposed the flaws in Bondi's argument? Or had he simply poked the bear, making a few cheap jokes at her expense? The truth was, the lines between comedy and politics had blurred that night, and neither Kimmel nor Bondi would be the same again. One thing was clear: this was far from over.